even if I wasn't getting these awards, because now obviously the awards are making me think like, oh, I probably really should keep going. Even if I wasn't getting the traction or being viral, even if nobody's listening, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 30 years from now, people are going to wonder, why didn't the museum do more?
You just heard Pamela Morales, the communications officer at the Museum of South Texas History. Museums are sometimes viewed as inaccessible relics of the past, but Pamela and her team have been challenging the status quo by using 21st century content to make local history accessible to the masses. Let's find out how to start with what you have, where you are, why representation matters, and why going viral shouldn't be your end goal.
One thing from an outsider's point of view that is really interesting to me is how there is such a rich history down in southern Texas with the Mexican roots, and you mentioning in one of the podcasts that your mother and her siblings were like migrant workers, and now how you have become so instrumental in helping us learn about all the achievements. And it seemed like your second season of the podcast focused on a lot of the Latino influence down there, the Hispanic influence. If I'm not mistaken, I think most of the guests had surnames that were Spanish,
Mexican American. And that second season was really about the children of politicians. I mean, I've never lived anywhere other than the Valley. So, I mean, obviously, I think I live in the greatest place on earth. I don't know about other places. And I guess in a way, I kind of could say that in the Valley, politics is really a family affair and a really big deal down here. I am married to a reporter, so I meet a lot of other reporters not from the area that come down here for 2-3 years and then they leave. But they always talk about the Valley and its uniqueness, especially politics. I mean, they kind of prefer the corruption, obviously. But I still think that the Valley is on the map, mostly on the map now, because these politicians in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s were really leaving behind a legacy, education, and things like that. The Valley technically was established through Anglos coming from the north. They were coming here and buying up land. Some people say they stole the land through political gains. That's how they established the cities that the Valley has now. But Latinos, Hispanics, Chicanos, whoever you talk to, they might use one of those terms. We started to take over, and that's why being in politics in the Valley is such a big deal, because we're trying to represent the people because we're a majority Hispanic population. So,
right. I was looking at some of the numbers before we started talking. The Latino Hispanic population of Brownsville and McAllen, it's like 90% plus, right?
At least that's what we saw in the last census, because we had to look over it for an application. I mean, we're still predominantly Hispanic down here.
It must be a whole different world when outsiders come down there, because of course you all Spanish and English is spoken and a lot of Spanglish.
Yes. My mom definitely speaks Spanglish. If you do want to get that perspective of outsiders, the fourth season with Village in the Valley, they are a nonprofit here in the region founded by African American and Black individuals who moved to the Valley in the 90s. And also the Anglo community, not necessarily the ones who've been here for generations, but the ones who are moving here to the Valley. We do have a Filipino population. We do have an Indian population. They had really great perspectives as far as like why they moved and why they never left. Yeah, if you wanted to hear more about an outsider's perspective, that might be a good season to listen to.
That's what attracted me at first, was that you are doing all these initiatives. You're the communications officer of the Museum of South Texas, but the things you're doing, you were doing them during the pandemic when everybody else was screeching to a halt with creativity. I said, look at this person. I was looking at what you were doing and you were putting such energy into it. And it was like a flame in the darkness. So many people were buried in misery, but you weren't. How did that happen?
Actually, the pandemic, oh my gosh, it feels like forever ago. So when I started working here in 2015, they did have a marketing person. The marketing person was leaving, and so they felt like, okay, maybe it's time for us to go a different direction as far as that position. So they really wanted somebody who could put the museum in the digital world. I think in 2011, they got on Facebook, and that's all they had. And then the marketing person before me, she got the museum a Twitter account, a LinkedIn account, and then YouTube. Now people tell you, like, even if you're not active on these social media accounts, you need to have an account because you don't want someone to impersonate your institution. So they wanted somebody who could figure out how to be more active online. And I had some experience. I had worked for city media relations for about 3 years. They hired me and I started up doing a lot more social media. So taking photos, posting online, saying like, hey, this is what the museum's doing, etc. I also started recording and taking photos of our events, our programming, because, you want to tell people what you're doing, right? You need to let the community know, like, hey, this is what's going on at the museum. And then I also was doing Most History Collection series, which is on our YouTube channel. And that one is focusing on objects and artifacts in our collections that are not on display. So we have a really big collection and a lot of great items in there with a lot of backstories to them. We do have the first radio that was bought in this neighborhood, even though the radio obviously was mass produced, but the fact that it was the first one in their neighborhood, that is the story. We take objects like that. So I wanted to record those stories with the collections team. So we came up with the Most History Collection series. So that's online. I did about maybe 3 a year. And then the podcast became this avenue because there was a volunteer that we had who was super history like buff. He loved everything history and he wanted to just like talk about everything, and he would come to us and give these ideas of like, oh, we should talk about this and we should, do X, Y, and Z. And it sort of became a little bit overwhelming. He was, rest his soul, he actually passed away in 2019. Yeah. But he was so smart and he just loved history and so enthusiastic. I mean, everybody loved him. So when he was telling us that he wanted to do all these things, and we kind of thought, let's keep the enthusiasm, but let's go somewhere else with this. Somehow, I guess I just thought, you know what, maybe it's time to do a podcast because, again, the museum needs to be everywhere, social media and online stuff. So that was like 2018 when I started the podcast. Every year I just kept this like, okay, this year I'm going to do this topic. And then 2020 hit and it was really hard. I think honestly that we were kind of behind the times during complete shutdown because there were other museums that were creating content for the school district, for like schools and teachers and doing other type of online programming. And I just could not figure it out. And then finally, like sometime in April of 2020, I figured out, okay, we can use Zoom, right? Like we can go online, go on Facebook and do all these things. So we were doing online programming, kind of like presentations and stuff. Because 2020 was a year that we were supposed to celebrate 50 years, I had already lined up a podcast season for that to complement all the other things that we're doing for the 50th. So I interviewed some people using the Anchor app because obviously I couldn't meet them in person. I mean, we did do also a lot of other programming. We got some grant money from several organizations. We bought new equipment. Before 2020, I did everything by myself. And then I got help in early 2020 because I was getting married and I was going to go on my honeymoon for 2 weeks. And I knew that was going to be a really long time to be out, especially during February, one of our busiest months here at the museum, because we have a big community event that was only supposed to be temporary, but obviously the pandemic hit and it was like, oh no, I kind of need their help. And so one of them, Tony Pena, he's on my team, really good with video and audio production and graphics, helped me realize what I've always wanted to do at the museum. I'm sort of like the jack of all trades, but master of none. I can do audio production. I can do video production. I can do some graphics. I know how to obviously post on social media and manage all of that. But I don't consider myself an expert. I feel that I still have a lot to learn. So Tony was just a really great addition. Now we were switching over to doing pre-recorded animation videos. So we did summer nights at the museum online. So those are actually available. And Tony really did a great job with editing those. And then we started switching over to more online programming with our other events. So we were doing workshops live on Facebook, and that's put us on the map. Other museums, even though they were doing something similar, it was just really, oh, let's interview somebody, and that's it. We also did some programming for the holidays. So we were showing people how to do tamales and cookies, pan de polvo. So I think that really put us on the map. But obviously now that the world is wanting to go back to pre-COVID times, online is not as big of an audience as it was in 2020 and 2021. But we now have Museum Pláticas. So that is a live talk show on Facebook and YouTube. It's sort of the same concept as a podcast. So one of the reasons why we decided to do the podcast was not only to obviously let an enthusiastic volunteer share his knowledge about history, but also capturing stories that we normally would not have gotten before. So we don't have a standard official oral history program here at the museum. We have struggled to establish the standard museum oral history program because of turnover, finding the right equipment, finding the time to assign someone to do this work, because it is a lot of work. You got to schedule, you got to call people and all of that. We felt that the podcast would be one of the ways that we could get other people's stories and share their stories with the public. Because normally when you do oral histories, they're not as accessible. They are archived in a museum's collection. And if you want to listen to this oral history, they may or may not have it digitized or posted online. So we felt that the podcast would help break down that barrier of accessibility. And Museum Pláticas, again, it's sort of the same concept, but we're doing video. So it's a live talk show. So we interview community members. We started in April 2021, and we've been doing one a month since then.
So when you say the we, who are these we that are coming up with all these creative ideas?
So my coworker, Tony Peña, and also the museum CEO, Francisco Guajardo. They both kind of started around the same time. The museum CEO started working here at the museum in 2019, September. And then Tony started February 2020. So all that new stuff, when I say we, I include them. But before then, I mean, it was basically all just me. Like I was the one doing all the grunt work and the stuff. But yeah, so that's what I mean by we.
I wanted to give credit to the we, but there wouldn't have been a we unless there was a you. Something that I gleaned watching some of your live shows in 2021 online, when we were still in the pandemic, you were doing your live shows and they were really interesting. And sometimes you had like 3 people online at one time and you managed it so well, a lot of excitement. You're one of those people from my experience, like you said, you can watch something or you can think of an idea, but then you implement it. What in your background helped you be able to do that? Because not everyone has that where they can see something and maybe even just a limited version of it and then try to find solutions. What do you attribute that to?
I actually think about this a lot, and I'm not entirely sure, other than maybe my mom, the way she parented me. I mean, some of it might be cultural, right? Mexicans or Hispanics or Latinos or Chicanos in general, we work really hard. I think also it might have to do a little bit with me being a woman. The video and audio production industry is mostly male dominated. And when I was at the University of Texas Pan American, which is a local university here, you could tell that females taking those broadcast journalism classes, because that's what I was taking, they wanted to be TV reporters. Now, mind you, I did want to be a TV reporter. I wanted to be Diane Sawyer. I loved watching George Stephanopoulos every Sunday. I wanted to be like that. Just something just didn't feel right, though, about me wanting to be a TV reporter. The females, they wanted to be TV reporters, and then the males just ended up doing all of the video and audio production. And I guess in a way, it kind of made me mad because it kind of made themselves, seem like a little bit helpless. And I'm just like, no, we are smart. And also, it really made me mad when we would do video projects. When I was on camera, like, you could tell that they just weren't thinking about like framing. They weren't thinking about the story and the visuals. When I was behind the camera, my stuff, the stuff that I film, the stuff that I edit was 10 times better. I kind of developed into this like mentality of like, I love this. I love doing this. I love creating stuff, and also just trying to beat the boys. I can film just as good as you. I can carry this 20-pound camera. I can get like the good shots. I can frame the interviews really well. I think that's where it started, where I just felt like I have to constantly prove not only to others, but to myself that I can do video production just as good as a male.
That reminds me of a quote. Steve Jobs was talking about how they built managers in Apple during one interview. And he said that best managers that they had weren't people that wanted to be a manager. He said they were individual contributors who felt that it just wasn't getting done right and they just had to step up.
I still don't like being a manager. I mean, Tony and I work really well. And I think it's mostly because even though we can do more now with the both of us, we do have a lot of work here at the museum. And so sometimes we kind of have to split up the work. But I don't like the idea of like having to be a manager because it's a lot of administrative work that I just do not want to deal with.
So you're that individual contributor who knew they had to step up to get stuff done.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
And so you've mentioned most a couple times. I want our audience to know when you say most, what is the acronym standing for? I know, but
most is just a shortened version of the Museum of South Texas History. In the last 10 years, we've been using most history.
Okay. I like that too. That always stayed in my mind. Most just makes you feel like there's a lot of abundance there. The South Texas history, Rio Grande Valley, can you describe it a little bit for us? What does the world need to know about this Rio Grande Valley where you are at the border of northern Mexico?
3.5 hours south of San Antonio. And people in San Antonio claim that they are South Texas, which I guess they kind of sort of are, I guess, if you're from Dallas, right? And you're driving south, you are basically going to South Texas. We are even further south than San Antonio. And our area is unique because before colonization, the area was a crossroads. I mean, it still is in modern times, but before colonization, it was a crossroads because this was an area that was used by indigenous groups, First Peoples. There's a lot of them, so I can't really name them all, but they used this area to cross the river. So the Rio Grande, it is a big river. There are claims written by one of the explorers, Cabeza de Vaca, and some other ones, that the river was possibly as big as the Mississippi River during that time before colonization. And we do have a salt lake. And there are artifacts from even Mexico City, where the Aztecs, their empire in that area. So we know that trading was happening, but there were no, at least that we're aware of, any permanent settlements because the area is a delta. So it's hot and it's humid. Before the river was tamed, 10 miles north, 10 miles south of the river, it was basically a forest. In the 1700s, José de Escandón came to survey the land at the request of the Spanish, and he brought some settlers from the Mexico City area, and it was rough. not really much around to eat. Little ranches started developing because the Spanish, they brought cattle. So there was some ranching. It was a really big industry, a really big empire up until the early 1900s when the Anglos from the northeast, and the Midwest came to the valley because they heard that there was abundance of land. So they came over and they, depending on what you believe, they bought land, stole land. They started cultivating the land. So we became an agricultural area for a really, really, really long time. And you can actually listen about the produce empire in the valley in the first season of the podcast, Stories from the Rio Grande. I guess 100 years later, I think we're more urbanized. So not really much produce growing around here. But also the Rio Grande Valley is not a valley, as I mentioned. It is a delta. It's a 4-county area. Someone has said that we are actually the size of Rhode Island. So the 4 counties are Starr County, Hidalgo County, Cameron County, and Willacy County. 1 million plus people.
That drives me again to want to check out some of those stories on your site. How does a person find your content?
The YouTube channel, mosthistory.org. You'll find a ton of videos that we've produced over the years, including Museum Platicas. The Stories from the Rio Grande podcast is on Anchor. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. So you would just need to search Museum of South Texas History or Stories from the Rio Grande, and that should pop up for you.
Okay. You're a practical person, so obviously you're getting some type of feedback from this. What is motivating you to keep making more? What type of engagement are the people giving you that shows you that this has been really great?
People love, again, listening to those stories. We did one about a horse, a Morgan horse. I didn't realize that there were different types of horses, but there are. I believe it's Mercedes. So she had gotten a horse when she was a little girl, and then she had to sell her horse in order to go to college. And so years later, she gets married and, she tells her husband about how she loved that horse. And apparently he tracked down the horse. Obviously the horse was long gone, but the descendant. And so we posted that, right? Because we created a video on it. And the family just loved it. The podcast has gotten some great feedback. We've gotten some recognition for our digital content from the Texas Association of Museums. We got a gold award, meaning pretty much the best of the best for best virtual experience. So during the pandemic, we did create a 10-part series for schools. So basically it was a virtual tour of our museum. Museum Platicas got a bronze award for best social media experience. Even if I wasn't getting these awards, because now obviously the awards are making me think I probably really should keep going. The other reason why I still kept going, even if I wasn't getting the traction or being viral, because I felt like even if nobody's listening 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 30 years from now, people are going to wonder, why didn't the museum do more? I think that's what keeps me motivated in producing this content.
That's the pinnacle of our conversation, because I couldn't even explain it the way you just explained it. You're a visionary, Pamela, because you're thinking 30 years down the road. A lot of people are missing that. They're only thinking about, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to have a result tomorrow, or I'm not going to do this because I won't have a result tomorrow. But they're not thinking about planting the seed of anything.
And I think the other reason why we're doing all of this as well is people in our culture, this is just from my perspective, feel like their stories don't matter. So when we're recording their stories, whether that's through the podcast or maybe through Museum Platicas, they can see themselves now. We just want people to share their stories because they do matter and they could impact somebody else, or just a way of sharing our culture, sharing our experiences so we can have a better view of others and understand where they're coming from.
Man, okay. Yeah, that is good. I don't even know how to describe what you do. It's big time.
So I actually had this conversation a week ago based off of another conversation that I had years ago with someone else on staff. Our mission, the museum's mission, is to preserve and present the borderland heritage of South Texas and northeastern Mexico for all generations. The communications team is preserving by recording and documenting the stories of our community and the public programming that we do, and then presenting it by publishing it online.
Man, I didn't know you were going to be so fluid with it.
Someone had actually asked, well, what are you doing? Because we're not an exhibits team. We're not a collections team. Like, we're not preserving artifacts and we're not presenting them through the exhibits. And so I think it took me a really long time to say, like, no, the communications team matters. And I think that that should go for all museums because we live in a digital world. Like, it just kind of makes sense, right? We're consuming more digital content. We are an extension of that preserving and presenting.
You just described the new world, the 21st century. I just did a little search while you were describing that. And I am literally 1,744.6 miles from you, but I know about you.
Yeah. Wow.
I've never been to the Valley, but your digital outreach is working.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Where are you located?
I am actually in between Washington, D.C. and the Baltimore area, but it's like the work in the Valley, what you do, you are grabbing by the horns this thing because not many museums are taking that approach. The pandemic has taught us that you can't just be waiting for everybody to come to you. Commend you because you're a Renaissance person.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So if a person wants to get in contact with you in particular, maybe they have something about the museum they would like to know, or they want to do something to support the Most History initiative, how could they contact you?
So they can definitely contact me via email, which is P for Pamela, pmorales at history.org.
There are going to be a lot of young people listening to this and seeing this amazing girl, Mexican-American, who has developed this skill set. What do you tell them?
I would say, I know it is going to be hard to find a passion. I found mine pretty quickly, so that's my experience. It's never really too late to start a passion or something that you really like to do. If you are a person of color, just keep going. I never really applied for internships because I just felt like I could never get one, but I know people around me who have, and they're on to bigger and better things. If you're young and you're listening to this, just know that you're not alone and you need to find people who are willing to help you, guide you in the right direction. I actually got the job at the museum because my professor sent out the job opening. Find your mentor and follow people that are doing things that you would want to do too. Don't be afraid to knock on the door or send them a message, slide into their DMs. Actually, the job that I got with the city that I worked at, I actually knocked on the door. And I asked, are y'all looking for anybody? And they're like, actually, we are. Put yourself out there. I know it's scary. Don't be scared to leave your comfort zone and just practice. Find your people and ask them to help you, whatever that may be.
Those are great words, Pamela. Thank you so much. You're a hard worker and you're also very humble. I don't think you can get a better combination than that.